The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who yells, but the one who stays quiet. Think about that for a moment. Within the silent walls of everyday life, where everyone seems to act as expected, there's someone who doesn't draw attention to themselves, and that's precisely the person who holds the greatest hidden power. Have you ever stopped to consider who the true protagonist would be in a tense situation? The empath, the silent one, often seen as the most vulnerable, can be the most transformative and unpredictable presence of all. They say weakness lies in sensitivity, but is that really true? What if, in reality, the empath is a catalyst for profound change, someone capable of seeing beyond masks and accessing dimensions of reality that others ignore? What happens when the one who sees the pain of others is finally betrayed? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to access more stories like this. Before revealing how the pain of betrayal can forge unshakable power within the empath, I want to invite you to be a part of this channel. If you identify with topics of deep psychology, self-knowledge, and practical spirituality, like this video, subscribe now and hit the bell. You'll be supporting a community of seekers who, like you, have already realized there's something greater waiting to be discovered. And of course, share in the comments if you've ever felt at some point that being sensitive seemed like a sentence, but deep down, you had a premonition it was a source of hidden strength. Now, get ready. What you're about to hear isn't just an explanation. It's an invitation to a journey inward, where light and shadow fight their most intense battle, and where sometimes the greatest strength is born from the deep silence of a wounded soul. Imagine the following scenario. A group of people arguing heatedly, voices overlapping, inflamed arguments trying to dominate the room. In the midst of it all, someone remains silent, attentive, absorbing every nuance, every unspoken expression. Who is this person to you? For many, it's the weak, the passive, the dominated. But what if I told you that's exactly where the real danger lies? Not danger in the aggressive sense, but as a latent force, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The empath is often confused with the submissive. But there's a profound error in this superficial view. The empath's true strength lies in internal, silent processes that escape common understanding. The empath doesn't act on impulse. They observe, perceive, feel, and because of that, they respond with surgical precision when necessary. Jung said that what we deny masters us, what we accept transforms us. The empath, in their silence, doesn't flee. They prepare. Perhaps you, watching now, have felt this way, invisible amidst the chaos, but aware of everything around you. This feeling of seeing where few see, of sensing what few intuit, that's where the beginning of a profound transformation resides. The empath is not just a receiver, but an alchemist of subtle energies. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who yells, but the one who remains silent, absorbing everything, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true essence. But after all, where does this silent strength of the empath come from? To understand, we need to dive into the universe of Carl Gustav Jung's analytical psychology. Jung was one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, dedicating his life to studying the mysteries of the mind, dreams, and especially universal archetypes. Have you heard of these concepts? Light, shadow, persona, words that seem distant from routine, but which, in reality, live within each of us. Jung's archetypes are like large psychic molds present in humanity's collective unconscious. They act as patterns, internal stories that influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, often without our conscious awareness. The persona, for example, is the social mask we wear to adapt to the world and be accepted. The shadow is everything we repress, deny, or don't want to see in ourselves, our fears, insecurities, and hidden desires. Now imagine the empath within this system. This individual who intensely feels the emotions of others is in direct contact with these archetypes, both in their own psyche and in others. The empath becomes a kind of radar for collective unconscious dynamics. They perceive when someone wears a mask, feel the weight of an unintegrated shadow, grasp nuances that escape most. This sensitivity isn't weakness. It's a rare gift, but also a burden, because carrying such deep perceptions can be exhausting and even painful. Jung believed that the process of self-transformation involved a courageous confrontation with these internal forces. The empath, conditioned to prioritize others and adapt too much, often gets lost in labyrinths of others' expectations. But when they begin to perceive these mechanisms, light, shadow, persona, a journey of maturation begins, in search of the self, the essential, authentic core that transcends masks and integrates all parts of the personality. Have you ever felt like you were playing a role that wasn't truly yours? That you needed to please, comply, or even annul a part of who you are to be accepted? That's the dynamic of the persona in action. But the good news is, understanding this structure is the first step to freeing yourself and accessing the power of the true you. There's an almost universal belief that being sensitive is being weak. How many times have you heard phrases like, "You feel too much," "You need to be tougher," "You have to stop caring"? In a society that values quick action, automatic responses, and rationality, the empath is often seen as someone defective, unfit for the social game. But from Jung's perspective and the deepest human experiences, this view is, in fact, a monumental misconception. Empathy, contrary to what people think, requires courage. Imagine bearing the weight of others' feelings, absorbing pains that aren't yours, perceiving emotional subtleties on an almost visceral level. That's not for the weak. It takes strength to remain open when the natural impulse would be to close off, to protect oneself. The empath lives, every day, a silent duel between losing themselves in others and maintaining their own essence. Carl Jung teaches us that, to become whole, we need to unite opposites, recognize, accept, and integrate our zones of shadow and light. In the empath's case, strength lies precisely in this movement of integration. When the empath accepts their deep sensations, instead of denying them, they transform their sensitivity into a strategic radar, a weapon of psychic self-defense, capable of detecting manipulations, lies, and hidden intentions much earlier than the average person. What's more, empathy is the antidote to dehumanization. In an increasingly cold world where superficial relationships multiply disguised loneliness, the empath offers what is most revolutionary: authentic presence, deep listening, true connection. It is in listening to the silence of others, in perceiving the unspoken, that the true power to transform is born, not only oneself, but also those around. Who has never felt out of place for feeling too much, for often realizing that their worldview is broader or more sensitive than others? This, far from being weakness, is an invitation to a mission. The mission to show, by silent example, that being vulnerable is to be deeply human, and that only those who truly allow themselves to feel can, in fact, transform. Now we come to the crucial point of this journey, the moment when the empath begins to question their own mask. The persona, as we've seen, is the character we wear to be socially accepted, to not displease, to protect ourselves from others' judgment. But what happens when this mask becomes a prison, when the cost of pleasing others is the abandonment of oneself? The empath, throughout life, learns to calibrate their expression according to the environment. They act this way so as not to bother, to protect loved ones, to avoid conflicts. However, this excess of adaptation comes at a high price. It gradually erodes the relationship with oneself. Then a void emerges, a restlessness difficult to explain, as if something fundamental were missing. Not infrequently, this feeling intensifies after a betrayal, a profound disappointment, an unexpected rupture. It is at this exact moment of pain that something sacred can be born. Jung calls this phenomenon the emergence of the self, the authentic core that was covered by the persona. It's when the empath realizes, almost brutally, that they can no longer annul themselves, that continuing to wear the mask means dying inside. This awakening isn't glamorous. It's usually made of silent tears, sleepless nights, and a feeling of being adrift. But it's also the dawn of a new possibility. The empath, by removing the mask, comes into contact with their deepest truth. They discover that true freedom only exists when one accepts oneself entirely, including the rejected aspects. They seek to reconcile their own light and shadow, recognizing that balance is not the absence of pain, but the ability to go through it without losing one's center. Have you ever experienced this process? Have you ever felt that, even with fear, you needed to free yourself from others' expectations, to reconnect with your essence? This is the empath's crossing, a courageous walk towards self-knowledge, where every tear is also a seed of power. Removing the mask is finally, giving rise to psychological rebirth. The true protagonist of the story isn't someone who was never wounded, but someone who accepts their wounds as portals to new strength. And speaking of strength, what comes after this rebirth is even more surprising. Because by integrating pain, the empath discovers their alchemist nature, someone capable of transforming suffering into wisdom, weakness into power, silence into voice. But this is a stage for the next chapters. If you've stayed this far, remember, the most dangerous person isn't the one who yells loudly, but the one who has learned to listen to their own silence and has finally decided to be who they are. Now, tell me, have you ever felt this rupture between what you show the world and who you truly are? Share your experience in the comments. By doing so, we help more people understand that empathy isn't weakness, it's latent strength, waiting to awaken. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this content with those who need this message. Together, we are stronger and more human. Imagine for a moment the following scenario. You, an empath, open your heart, trusting others' intentions, cultivating bonds in the hope of reciprocity. And then suddenly someone betrays that trust. The shock comes like a cold wave, followed by a lacerating pain, an almost physical sense of loss, as if a piece of yourself had been forcibly torn away. And it's here, precisely here, that most people see only weakness and defeat. But the empath, when going through the pain, begins one of the most powerful psychological processes described by Jung, the integration of the shadow. The shadow, this profound concept, is everything we deny or repress within ourselves: anger, jealousy, fear, desire for revenge, selfishness. It is the forbidden territory of the soul, the emotional basement where we hide what we deem unacceptable. Jung said that if we don't confront the shadow, it doesn't disappear. On the contrary, it governs our lives in a veiled way. There is only one path to true freedom, looking into the eyes of what has been repressed. And the empath, after suffering betrayal, finds themselves facing a dilemma: either remain imprisoned by resentment or use the pain as a trigger for self-knowledge. What makes the empath's journey unique is their ability to feel everything intensely, including their own shadowy side. Instead of denying anger, fear, or vulnerability, the empath who sets out to grow confronts these emotions with brutal honesty. They know that by denying them, they weaken themselves, but by integrating them, they become stronger. Have you noticed how, after a traumatic event, certain aspects of your personality become more evident? Anger that was once unacceptable now emerges as self-defense. Fear as caution. Wounded pride as an impulse for reconstruction. This movement, unhealthy when ignored, transforms into power when understood. The pain of betrayal, for the empath, becomes a laboratory of emotional maturity. And Jung goes further. He teaches that by integrating the shadow, we don't become shadowy beings, we become whole. Someone capable of looking inward without horror or denial, recognizing that light and shadow exist in any complete personality. The empath who accepts their most human instincts, instead of fighting against them, expands their consciousness. They gradually become sovereign of themselves. Think about this. What have you been hiding from yourself? What parts of your personality do you judge, repress, or fear showing the world? The empath, when they cross the dark valley of pain and integrate their shadow, finally finds the source of their transformative power. And it is precisely this power that makes them immune to manipulation, because no one can hurt them with what they themselves have already recognized, accepted, and transmuted within themselves. We have now arrived at one of the most fascinating concepts in Jungian psychology: individuation. For Jung, to individuate is to become who one truly is, a process of self-discovery and integration of opposites, leading us from fragmentation to totality. And paradoxically, it is pain, trauma, and profound crisis that usually catalyze this psychological rebirth. In the empath's case, this process is even more dramatic and beautiful. As someone accustomed to experiencing the world through the prism of others' emotions, the empath often finds themselves on the sidelines of their own self, living for others, for the sake of others. But, after betrayal, when pain annihilates old references, the vital need to rebuild oneself arises. It's like an inner fire burning everything that is false, superficial, self-annihilating. Jung described individuation as a return to the self, a reconnection with what is unique, non-negotiable, and essential in each being. For the empath, this path begins when they stop identifying solely with the role of victim or martyr. They see for the first time that they survived the deepest rupture and that there is life beyond trauma. They also discover that they no longer need to be held hostage by others' expectations, nor succumb to emotional manipulation. This rebirth isn't sudden, it's gradual, mysterious, made up of small daily victories. It's realizing that the inner voice begins to strengthen, that the fear of rejection dissipates in the face of self-acceptance, that the feeling of emptiness gives way to the desire to create, to innovate, to choose new paths. The empath, as they approach their essence, develops unshakable autonomy. They learn to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without fear, to choose who deserves or doesn't deserve to remain in their life. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is realizing that, contrary to what many preach, sensitivity doesn't need to be suppressed. It can be refined, channeled, used as an existential compass. The reborn empath has the rare ability to unite vulnerability and strength, compassion and discernment, sweetness and firmness. They have become whole, not because they denied their pain, but because they allowed it to transform them. Can you see yourself in this process? Have you ever felt that, after much suffering, a new you began to emerge, stronger, truer, more autonomous? Share in the comments because your story can be a beacon for those still going through the same storm. Remember, individuation is the destiny of every courageous soul, and the empath, upon rebirth, becomes their own master. With courage to revisit shadows and humility to embrace the new, this transformed empath now has something no one can take away: self-awareness. They no longer depend on external validation. They no longer fear manipulation. What was once a wound is now a sacred scar, reminding them every day that it is possible, indeed, to be reborn from one's own ashes. If up until now we've talked about healing, integrating, and rebirth, now we enter the most strategic stage of the journey, the empath's transition from being reactive to becoming a true emotional strategist. And this is perhaps the most subversive part, the one that most breaks the stereotype of the empath as a permanent victim. Look, before the integration of pain, the empath's reaction to betrayal is usually intense, visceral, often uncontrolled. Anger, guilt, self-pity, a desire to disappear. Everything revolves around the impact received. But after the process of individuation, something radically different happens. The empath gains the ability to respond, and not just react. Reaction is automatic. Response is conscious, intentional, thought out. The mature empath no longer lets themselves be swayed by emotional blackmail, subtle manipulations, or narcissistic traps. They identify the psychological game early on, perceive attempts to invade their integrity, and instead of exploding, they retreat, observe, choose the best strategy. This isn't coldness, it's emotional sovereignty. Jung affirmed that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. The empath who awakens to their own power gains an extraordinary advantage, that of no longer being enslaved by what they feel. They feel everything, as always, but now they are master of their own emotions. They know that others may try to provoke them, but the decision to react or not belongs only to them. Over time, this strategic posture manifests in all areas of life, in relationships, at work, in friendships, in family relationships. The empath stops begging for affection, submitting to unhealthy dynamics, accepting less than they deserve. They finally learn to use their sensitivity as a radar. Far from being vulnerable to attack, they anticipate the other's moves, read patterns, see hidden motivations. And most incredibly, the empath, by choosing to act strategically, does not become cold or calculating, they become whole. Someone who preserves their own essence, but no longer allows themselves to be devoured by the system or by the desires of others. This is the silent victory of the sensitive. Instead of retaliating with violence, they transform weakness into practical wisdom. Perhaps you've already made this shift. Perhaps you're still on the path. Regardless of the stage you're in, know that every pain overcome brings you closer to the most authentic and powerful version of yourself. The empath only stops being manipulated when they learn to think emotionally, and whoever masters their own reactions becomes unbeatable in the face of any adversity. And now it's up to you. Share in the comments if you've noticed this difference between reacting on impulse and responding with strategy. This is a fundamental step towards true emotional freedom. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and send this content to anyone who needs to make this leap of consciousness. Remember, transformation begins within, and only those who go through their own chaos arrive on the other side with hands full of wisdom. In the next segment, we'll explore how this new posture generates unprecedented autonomy, transforming sensitivity into sovereignty. Because in the end, the self-aware empath is no longer anyone's prisoner. They are the master of their own destiny. The reborn empath knows the unique taste of inner freedom, a rare psychological autonomy, hard-won. It's no longer about emotionally surviving, adapting to others' desires, or dimming oneself to fit external expectations. It's about deliberately choosing one's own presence, one's own silence, one's own company. This is when what Jung might call enlightened detachment emerges. Detachment isn't indifference, but discernment about where to place your energy, attention, and affection, and crucially, where not to place it. The mature empath doesn't shy away from human contact, but now they know they are not responsible for anyone's emotional rescue. They perceive with solar clarity that compassion is not synonymous with self-sacrifice, and they learn, often after suffering numerous disappointments, that self-care is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Have you ever noticed how revolutionary and even disconcerting it is to refuse the role of savior? The empath feels, almost as a primal instinct, the urgency to support, fix, comfort, but understanding that each person is responsible for their own journey is liberating. From this awareness, the empath begins to build solid boundaries, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. They know that often saying no is the greatest act of love for oneself and for the other. With this new perspective, the empath finally understands that no one has the right to kidnap their peace. Not family, not friends, not partners. They become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of the awareness that their energy is precious and limited. They prioritize environments, relationships, and projects that nourish them, avoiding those that drain their vitality. This is sovereignty, the art of belonging to oneself before belonging to any group or relationship. Perhaps the greatest gift of this stage is the end of emotional dependence. The empath stops begging for recognition, validation, or affection. They discover, almost with surprise, the sweetness of their own company, the strength of inner silence, the joy of creative solitude. They learn to be whole in their own presence, realizing that true completeness is not in receiving love, but in being love for themselves and for the world. Now think about it. In what areas of your life do you still feel that you depend on the approval of others? What bonds should have already ended, but persist only out of habit or fear? Comment below. What was the greatest achievement of autonomy you've ever experienced? This can inspire other empaths to take the next step toward their own sovereignty. There's an almost supernatural ability that emerges when the empath goes through the journey of pain and is reborn to themselves, the capacity for psychological mirroring. Much more than just feeling what others feel, the mature empath becomes a living mirror, an honest surface that reflects back to those around them the truth they often try to hide from themselves and from others. Imagine an encounter where, upon looking into the empath's eyes, the person feels truly seen, without masks, without pretense. They feel exposed, naked, but not out of judgment, out of sincerity. The empath at this point in their journey no longer absorbs others' burdens. They simply reflect with clarity what the other is projecting. It's as if their presence makes it impossible to lie to oneself. Jung reminds us that what we deny in ourselves reappears in our destiny. The empath, now whole, becomes the bearer of the return of the repressed. This mirroring is not revenge nor manipulation. It's a silent invitation to authenticity. Often, emotionally immature people feel uncomfortable near conscious empaths, as they realize they can no longer maintain their own facades. The empath effortlessly reveals what is hidden, and this can generate admiration, but also resistance, because looking at one's own reflection can be, for some, unbearable. On the other hand, this power to mirror also acts as a cure. The empath begins to inspire by example, showing that it's possible to live without masks, integrating light and shadow. They no longer hide their own scars, nor try to appear perfect. They show, with humility, that imperfection is part of the journey, and that accepting one's own truth triggers a powerful transformation in others and in oneself. Think of a moment in your life when someone, perhaps silently, served as a mirror for your own limitations or greatness. Did they remind you of who you really are, even without saying a word? Now imagine how many people you've impacted without realizing it, just by being authentic. Share in the comments. Have you noticed the impact of your psychological mirroring? How do the people around you react to your authenticity? The empath at this stage no longer begs for connection, they provoke it. And in this process, they help others look inward, facing what needs to be seen, accepted, and finally transformed. We've reached the climax of our journey together, and perhaps the most crucial insight of all. The empath's true power isn't to react or to protect themselves at all costs. It's to transform suffering into wisdom and pain into structured compassion. The empath wasn't born to live on the sidelines of themselves, stifled by others' voices. They came to show that there's a radically human path, where being sensitive is above all, being strong. If you've stayed this far, you've received powerful tools. You've understood that sensitivity isn't a condemnation, but an invitation to self-mastery. That integrating the shadow isn't succumbing to the dark side, but becoming whole. That detachment isn't losing love, but choosing yourself daily. You've realized that autonomy isn't isolation, but maturity, and that psychological mirroring is a gift of healing, not manipulation. Now I challenge you. Share this video, leave your like, and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just digital actions. They expand the reach of this message, allowing more empaths to awaken and recognize themselves, avoiding cycles of silence and isolation. Write in the comments what touched you most in all these episodes. Your pain, your rebirth, your detachment, or your ability to impact the world without making a fuss. Help build a community where vulnerability and power walk hand in hand. Remember, no one can touch your essence when you've already traversed your own hell and emerged on the other side with hands full of alchemical gold wisdom, authenticity, compassion. The world needs your sensitive power, your dissonant voice, your courageous example. Your process inspires other processes. Your truth liberates other truths. Empathy is not weakness, it's ancestral strength. It's the foundation of all true transformation. And if you've made it this far, know this. You are no longer the person who started this video. Carry this new perspective into the world and remember, every day, that the most dangerous person in the room was never the one who yelled, but the one who silenced their ego and truly listened to their own soul. Until the next episode, transform yourself, express yourself, and never doubt you are the protagonist of your own journey.